Welcome to the True Crime Melting Pot, a podcast about true crime, serial killers, and all things in between. I'm Jess, your host of the podcast. Please like and subscribe to my podcast page, Facebook page, and Instagram. All links will be provided in the blurb below. Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the 5th podcast. I'm so excited that we're here and people are still interested, so thank you all for your continued support. I just want to give a special shout out to my cousins Kayla and Madeline. I know that they listen every week and enjoy it and give me feedback, so guys, I just want to let you know it's much appreciated. So, as you may have seen last week, we hit 200 downloads on the podcast. This makes me so happy. So happy, in fact, that I'm going to be running a giveaway on my Facebook page. So all you have to do is head over to the Facebook page, like, share and comment, done on the post, and then a winner will be chosen from this. The post will be put up today after the podcast, and I'll be running this giveaway from today until the following weekend. And I will announce the winner on next week's podcast, and also it'll be announced on our Facebook page and on our Instagram page as well. So to be sure to head over to True Crime Melting Pot with Jess podcast on Facebook, or search at TCMPP 2018 on Instagram to enter for the chance to win. So I hope you guys get involved in this giveaway, and I hope you guys enjoy it. Also, don't forget to check out our sponsor as well, www.killertrace, KILLERTRACE.com, and at killertrace on Instagram, to sign up today to be a part of the beta. I know that they're filling up really fast, so you might want to jump on this as soon as you can. It's a great new service. I've had the chance to see all their things that they have set up, so it's really good. So it's a subscription service where they send you out a murder case to solve. They have set up their own case management system, like I said, and other exciting features. So yeah, get onto it. It looks really, really good, and I definitely can't wait to be more involved with it. So let's get into this week's podcast. So this week we'll be coming back to Australian true crime in the case of Ivan Milat and the backpack murders. In my opinion, this is one of the most prolific cases that Australia has had. I know I've known about this case forever. I cannot remember a time when I was introduced to it, but it's so ingrained in me that I've been following this case ever since. There's been so much controversy around this case, and recent revelations have kept the case in the media and the public eye ever since Milat was arrested in 1996. So please be advised, this podcast will detail some gruesome murder, torture of victims. Listener discretion is advised. One fun fact I have in my 6 degrees from Ivan Milat is that my uncle's wife's family actually lived down the road from the home that Ivan lived in with his family. So where they found the belongings of the victims, which I'll get to later. So I thought that was a bit of a fun tidbit. Also, true crime expert that I'm inspired by, Amanda Howard, that you've heard me reference before in other podcasts. She also lives down the road from the family, and she actually corresponds with Milat in jail. So she's got the best job. She's got a job that I want to do. So let's get into Milat. So Ivan Milat was born December 27th, 1944. Milat was born here in Australia as one of 14 children. His family were a poor Yugoslavian family that lived in Guildford, New South Wales. The Milat family was very private and quiet family, so much that their early life is hard to determine. Obviously, at this early time, they were a normal farming family and completed their everyday activities. I could not find a lot of information on Milat's early life. As said before, the family is very private and has been since the story broke out about their sibling's son. The family is still living in the home that Ivan was living in at the time of his arrest. So from interviews with his brothers, they had stated that he had presented psychopathic behaviours from a young age. Being 14 children in the family, they were known around the neighbourhood as the bad kids, as the parents struggled to discipline all of them. The police have visited the family multiple times throughout Milat and his siblings' childhoods. So as you could imagine, 14 children running rampant around the neighbourhood just being complete pests, with Milat being a psychopathic young boy, just wouldn't have been ideal. So at the age of 17, Milat was constantly in trouble with the police and the courts on charges as varied as housebreaking, car thefts and armed robberies. Milat was always involved with the police in some sort of way. As he got older, his crimes obviously got worse. In 1971, Milat was tried and acquitted of a rape charge. 2 women came forward and stated that he had raped them at knife point. The court actually threw this out because they could not create a convincing case against him. Again, an instance where he had a history of doing this, and again, still nothing was done. It's so frustrating to me now that I'm doing this in-depth research to see the failures in our justice system, and also the American system. It's just ridiculous. So the bodies and discoveries and how they were murdered and identification. So I'm going to go through sort of the bodies, how they were found, what happened to them, things like that first, before we get into other stuff. So this will really detail everything. So as everyone who is aware of this case knows, that the bodies of the victims were found in the Belanglo State Forest. Belanglo State Forest is a pine forest that's located close to Berrima in New South Wales. So it's about 2.5 hours from Sydney. Belanglo is a 3,800 hectare forest and scrubs, or about 38 square kilometres of just forest. It has multiple four-wheel drive tracks, and you can go camping and spend the day in the forest. I've been wanting to go to that forest for some time, and I've heard of others going there, and it would be such an eerie feeling. Definitely something to experience. I do not mean, though, any disrespect to the families of those who were murdered. I just have a real interest in going there and seeing the actual forest for something that I've been learning about for so long. So I definitely would like to go there. So on September 19th, 1992, 2 runners were making their way along a scrub track in Belanglo during an orienteering activity. These 2 people came across a decaying corpse. Obviously the police were alerted to this, and in an investigation the following day, they found another body about 30 metres from the first. The first 2 bodies were identified as Carolyn Clark and Joanne Walters, who has recently been involved in a rubbish theory, but I will get to that. There was some confusion in the beginning, as many people and the media were trying to identify the bodies but as other backpackers had gone missing in the previous year. So the media and everyone was trying to pinpoint who the bodies were on all different people and giving false hope to families that it just wasn't. But the police were quick to identify that the two corpses were actually Caroline and Joanne. So the extent of their injuries were horrific. Joanne had been stabbed 14 times. She had been stabbed 4 times in the chest, 1 in the neck, and 9 times in the back. It was found that the stab wounds in her back would have paralysed her, preventing her from getting away from her attacker, who we now know as Milat. Caroline, on the other hand, was shot 10 times in the head, obviously dying instantly where she was shot. The police had determined from the patterns of the shots on Caroline's head that she was used as target practice. The extent of the injuries were disgusting and brutal, made by someone that had no sympathetic thoughts for human life, or just no care about human life. The investigation for these 2 bodies lasted 5 days, and according to the police, they did an extensive search of Belanglo and determined that there could be no more bodies in the forest, which we now know was a lie. So just over a year later, in October 1993, a man by the name of Bruce Pryor had discovered part of a skull in a remote part of the forest. Later that day, Pryor returned with the police to the place where he found the skull, where 2 more bodies were quickly discovered. These bodies were quickly identified as Deborah Everest and James Gibson. So much for no more bodies to be found in the forest. God knows what else could be in there. The injuries on these bodies were very similar to that of the first that were found. James's skeleton showed 8 stab wounds. Police had determined that a large knife had cut through the upper spine, severing his spinal cord and causing paralysis. The rest of the stab wounds to his back and chest would have punctured his heart and lungs. Everest's wounds were a lot more severe, if you could see anything worse than severing the spinal cord. Everest had been savagely beaten. Her skull had several fractures, and her jaw had been broken, with knife wounds on her forehead, so obviously identified by scrape marks on the forehead of the skull. So she was also stabbed once in the back. The finding of James Gibson's body was puzzling to police, for the fact that Gibson's belongings, which was his backpack and camera, were found on the side of the road in Galston Gorge, which is over 120 kilometres north of Belanglo. So I've driven Galston Gorge both during the day and the night, and both times they are creepy as hell. It's a very winding road with hairpin turns along the majority of it, and it's not lit at all. So I suspect back in 1990 or 1991, it would have been less busy with traffic, and I can see how Milat was able to get there and dump the belongings of James. Also, you get no reception in the gorge, which makes it even more terrifying if you were break down there. Just a little fun fact, I know that mobile phones weren't widespread back then, but it still makes it all the more freaky. You can actually do bushwalks through there and stuff, so it is a bit of a creepy place. It was a month later in November 1993, Police Sergeant Jeff Treicher found a skull in the clearing forest. The skull was determined to be the skull of Simone Schmidl. Simone was last seen hitchhiking on the 20th of January 1991. Though clothes found at the scene were not from Simone, but identified to be clothing of Anya Harbsich. I'm sorry if I massacre these names. I really tried to find out pronunciation. Another backpacker that had gone missing. Simone's skeleton, which was found, showed that she had 8 stab wounds. There could have been many more, but due to the deterioration and the decaying of the body around the skeleton, the marks on the skeleton are the only thing that they had to go off, and that could be evidence. So this skeleton also had trademark stab wounds to the back to sever the spinal cord and to cause paralysis. Also 2 other wounds which punctured her heart and lungs. In the same month, Anya and her boyfriend Gaber were found in the shallow graves 50 metres apart from each other. They were found on November 3rd, 1993. Only Anya's torso and arms or legs at the only Anya's torso with arms and legs were found at the burial site. Anya had been decapitated and her head was never found despite an extensive search by the police. This killing seemed a lot more brutal and aggressive than the previous ones. Gaber, on the other hand, was shot 6 times in the head. 3 bullets had entered through the base of his skull, and 3 were left in the side of his head. So the MO of the killer, which I'll go into now. So that was the final. So there was 7 bodies total that were found. So as you can see from all the killings mentioned, there were similarities between all of them, which assisted the police in building a case and finding the killer. I apologise for the background noise. For some reason my road wants to be crazy busy right now. So as you can see from all the killings mentioned, there were similarities between all of them, which assisted the police in building a case and finding the killer. They developed an MO for the killer, which was as follows. Each of the bodies had been deliberately posed face down with their hands behind their backs, covered with a pyramidal frame of sticks and ferns. A forensic study determined that each had suffered multiple stab wounds to the torso. The killer had evidently spent considerable time also with the victims during and after the murders, as campsites were discovered close to the location of each body, and shell casings of the same caliber were also identified at each site. Walters and Schmidl had been stabbed, whereas Clark and Neubauer had been shot numerous times in the head and stabbed post-mortem. 4 bullets were actually found in the skull of Caroline Clark, and obviously taken for forensic searching. Anya had been decapitated, and other victims showed signs of strangulation and severe beatings. Due to the last bodies that were found, it was speculated that there were multiple killers, because the cause of death changed in the ways in which the murder was committed. So there was stabbing and there was shooting and there was just all that sort of stuff. So there still is the theory that there were multiple killers. So now we go on to the 7th potential victim. There were 6 bodies and then a 7th potential victim. So with the bodies found, the police began their hunt for the serial killer. They had created a profile and began narrowing down suspects. They were faced, though, with a monstrous volume of people that could have been linked. Investigators therefore applied a link analysis technology to Roads and Traffic Authority, gym memberships, gun licensing, and internal police records. As a result, the list of suspects was progressively narrowed from an extensive list of individuals to a short list of 230. So there was more than that they had, and then they shortlisted it to 230. And then to an even shorter list of 32, which included the killer, Ivan. So imagine the work that had to go into this, the door knocking, asking for records. It would have been insanely intense, but what happens next assisted the police to get the bit of evidence they needed to pinpoint one person. So with the finding of the bodies and the police wanting any information they can get from the public, it was put out in the media. This case grew so big it went internationally, and when it hit the English media, this is when it caught the eye of Paul Onions. Paul Onions had come to Australia in the early 1990s. Backpacking from South Sydney, Paul was picked up by a man that went by the name of Bill. Once in the car, Bill kept asking Paul about his personal plans and what he is doing, which was off-putting to Paul. What really tipped him over the edge was when Bill began ranting and raving negatively about racism and making xenophobic remarks, which is just a prejudice against other people from other countries. Obviously worried he was a foreigner, I guess, in Australia, Paul grew concerned about being picked up by this man. So Bill pulled over and said he was going to get some tape decks from out behind the seat. Paul, concerned what was happening, began to think about how he could get out of this situation. Paul attempted to leave the car, and Bill came back in and said, "Where do you think you're going?" Paul said he just wanted to stretch his legs. At this point, Bill got back in the car, and Paul did not get out. Bill again said, "Oh, I'll get those tapes," and got out again, this time returning with a revolver and ropes. So obviously at this point, Paul managed to escape, but Bill took a shot at Paul. Paul ran from the car, leaving his backpack and personal belongings in there. Paul began running from the car, and Bill had threatened to kill him and tried taking a shot. So in the franticness, Paul actually managed to flag down a woman in the car, Joanne Berry, and managed to convince her to let him get into the car, and she took him to the local police station to report the crime. Now, I know I would have been terrified if I saw this guy running towards me screaming in the distance, and then I could see Milat standing in his car with a bloody revolver. I don't think I'd be wanting to stop, but then again, you would to sort of save the man. So that woman was just so brave and so smart to just stop, pick him up, and then just keep going. So once Paul made it to the local police station, he made the report, and then he went on to Sydney to get his new passport, and then left Australia and headed back to the UK. So unknown to him, he just escaped death. Obviously he may have known some sort of thing was going to happen, but he didn't know what he had been doing. So it was not until April 1994 that the news reached England about the attacks and killings in Australia. This is when it raised concern with Paul Onions, and he thought of what he had experienced in the same area and decided to contact the authorities. So with Paul's call to the Australian authorities, he was actually flown over from England as well, and it was corroborated with the story of another woman who called in the attack, which was the woman that picked Paul up that day, and it was determined if Paul could identify the attacker, he could potentially find the serial killer for the other killings. So he was flown over from the UK, and due to the narrowing of suspects as explained, out of the 32, Milat was one on the list. So Paul was brought over and to see if he could identify the attacker. There had been various tip-offs that they should be looking into the Milat family, but before this time there was nothing they could find that could link him to the case. This was the link they needed. So out of a video lineup that Milat had been part of, Paul identified him to be his attacker. This unravelled one of the most horrific serial killers in Australia. So with the identification from Paul Onion, that Milat was his attacker that day, and also that Milat and his brother Richard worked together on the railways, and that day Milat didn't go to work, but Richard did, evidence began mounting against Milat. This is what the police needed. On May 22nd, 1994, the police and SWAT teams surrounded the Milat's home on Cinnabar Street in Eaglevale, which is down the road from my aunty's parents' house, by over 50 police officers. Milat's brothers' houses were simultaneously searched in a combined effort of over 300 police officers. So obviously they knew that he was heavily involved in this case, otherwise they wouldn't have sent police and SWAT. It would have just been a routine door knocking, and the brothers' houses wouldn't have been searched. So they obviously had that reason to go and search the homes and get what they need. So Milat was arrested on robbery and weapons charges, but did not enter a plea. Thus began the search on Milat's home. Within the home they found a cache of weapons, including parts of a .22 caliber rifle that matched the type used in the murders, plus clothing and camping equipment, and cameras belonging to several of his victims. So it was seen at this time of the murder, in media reports and things like that Milat's girlfriend was actually wearing clothing from one of the killed victims. So just let that sink in. Milat gave a shirt to his girlfriend of the time, of a woman that he killed. All the camping equipment was found in the home, cameras and stuff like that. So you'd think he would be a bit more smarter about what he did, but anyway. On the 30th of May 1994, Milat was charged with the murder of several victims found in the Belanglo State Forest. At the beginning of 1995, Milat was remanded into custody until June 1995. Milat's trial did not begin until March 1996. The trial lasted 15 weeks. Milat was charged for all 7 murders and the attack on Paul Onions, which he pled not guilty to all charges. Onions was a witness of the prosecution and stood on the stand against Milat. Families of the victims also gave testimonies at the trial. It took 12 of the 15 weeks for the prosecution to present their case with hundreds of crime scene photos, exhibits, and expert witness testimonies. Milat's defense had Milat take the stand. Milat denied all involvement in the killings, but due to his performance on the stand, had made a bad impression on the jury. The defense team even tried to implicate members of Milat's family. How horrible would you feel? But I guess he didn't really care. He was quite vicious and does anything to try and get out of the crimes, as you will hear later. They also tried to tie in that Milat was set up for the crimes. But his brothers were definitely implicated. I know there was a theory that his sister was assisting him with the crimes, but that was never substantiated. But you'll see later on in his life in jail and things like that, the way in which he explains stuff or does stuff. He was just trying to find an out. He sounds like he was just a very manipulative man and wanted whatever was best for him. Very narcissistic, very much like Ted Bundy's sort of MO. Not in the way he killed, but the way in which he acted. Case was deemed not credible in the court for him being set up, his family members and things like that. There was just no evidence to link them to being there present in the crime. So the final decision came on the 27th of July 1996. The jury had deliberated for 3 days and come to the final decision of guilty on all charges. Milat was sentenced to 6 years for the attack on Onions and then given 7 consecutive life sentences for each of the murders. So that's about, life sentence is 25 years. So that's 7 times 25. Let me just quickly work that out because my maths is horrible. 7 times 25. So that's 175 years plus the 6 for Onions. So 180 years in prison. So, I mean, he's had many appeals, which you'll see I'll speak about a bit later. But he's never getting out of prison. What he did was vicious, and he hunted his prey, I believe, in those forests and things like that. So, yeah, he's never coming out. So Milat's final message in court that he got to say before he was taken away was he continued to protest his innocence. So he continued to say, even after being found guilty and all the evidence was presented, that he was actually innocent and wasn't involved in the crime. So when Milat began his jail sentence, he was placed in Maitland Jail. So this jail is about 2 hours from Sydney. Actually, Maitland Jail is now closed. You can do tours through there though, and like ghost tours and things like that, and see where everyone was housed and all that sort of stuff. So the jail actually closed in January 1998. On Milat's first day in the prison, he was beaten by another inmate. I tried to find some more information on that, but I couldn't find it anywhere. I checked some of my books as well, but I couldn't find any information. Then a year later, Milat and other inmates had attempted to put together a jailbreak. In May of 1997, the authorities had caught wind of this and foiled their plan. Suspiciously though, an accomplice, George Sarvis, was found hanged in his cell the next morning after the foiled plan. So, yeah, I don't know what the deal was with that one. I just saw that there was a few things here and there about him and Milat being together and stuff. And he killed himself after. So I don't know why. Maybe because he didn't want to be in any longer. I actually didn't do any research into George Sarvis, so I don't know what he was in jail for. I believe it wasn't as serious, obviously, as Milat, but he seemed to have wanted to sort of, or if he was told to kill himself, or someone did it. So I don't think it was looked into. So with this plan foiled, the inmates that were involved were separated. Milat was then transferred to Goulburn Supermax in Goulburn. So Goulburn is about 195 km southwest of Sydney and is complete bush. Very rural country town, and placed here are some of Australia's worst criminals. People like the rapists and murderers of Anita Cobby, some of the Scaff brothers, founders of the Brothers for Life gang. They were pretty prevalent around, I think it was 2011 to about 15. They were very prevalent, and other high notoriety criminals are also in there. So, although this is Supermax, amongst my research for Milat, I found that an inmate actually escaped from the maximum security wing. He cut through a gate at the back of the small, secure exercise yard attached to his cell, tied bed sheets to scale a wall, and then put a pillow around his waist to avoid being hurt by a razor wire. So he actually escaped from this prison. I'm assuming this is before it became Fort Knox, where they put up double fences. They put up the inmates weren't allowed out for certain hours a day. But if you want to give it a search, the inmate's name was Stephen Jameson. He was the one that escaped. And I'm just very intrigued about escapes and things like that. I just listened to a podcast from Australian True Crime where they spoke about the escapes. And there's that one escape from, I think it was Silverwater, where the guy flew in, or his girlfriend flew in a helicopter, landed it in the yard, he got in and just flew out. Like how did, I don't know, but I might do a podcast on escapes, which would be pretty cool. But yeah, just crazy. So Milat was put into the maximum security wing after a blade was found in his cell. He spent some time in solitary confinement as well. So now, if you've seen the effects that solitary has on people, depending on how long they spend there, it has major effects on their mental health and just them as a person. It really affects the way in which they act. Milat showed his imbalanced nature whilst in prison, though. So Milat had self-mutilated or attempted to multiple times in prison. In 2001, when he swallowed razor blades, staples, and other metal objects, obviously to an attempt to get him out or get in hospital or get attention, but who knows where his mental health was at whilst being in prison in Goulburn. The biggest self-mutilation occurred on the 26th of January 2009. Milat cut off his little finger, so not his whole finger, but the tip, with a plastic knife, or I think it was a knuckle down, with a plastic knife, may I reiterate. I don't know how he did that. I don't know, maybe he sharpened it, but how do you sharpen a plastic knife to the point where it can cut through skin and bone or cartilage? I don't know. So after he's cut this finger off, he had the intention of mailing the severed digit to the High Court. He was taken to Goulburn Hospital under high security. It never got to the High Court, by the way. However, on the 27th of January 2009, Milat was returned to prison after doctors decided surgery to reattach the finger was not possible. In 2011, Milat went on a hunger strike as well, losing 25 kilos in an unsuccessful attempt to get given a PlayStation, thinking he deserved a PlayStation. But he's had so many appeals as well that they've all been denied from the parole board or the appeals board. But he still protests to this day his innocence. And I'm actually going to a serial killer podcast recording for Monsters Who Murder with Amanda Howard and Robin McKnight next weekend on the 20th. And she's actually bringing along, which I saw today, some letters, which I'm hoping some of them from Milat. And I'll be able to have a look at them. And I have a few questions about if he still protests his innocence, or what's his still now to this day, what's his thoughts about the murders and who did it, and did he do it, and has he said he's done it? So I would love to sort of question her a bit on that. But I know that they're focusing on it as well in the podcast, because they've done a previous podcast about it. But Milat there's just so much to him, and obviously she corresponds with him, so she has the insider information, I guess. But yeah, I'd love to hear what she's got to say. So now, I don't know if anyone really knows much about this, but there was a copycat killer to Milat. This copycat killer was actually his great nephew, Matthew Milat. So Matthew Milat, along with his friend Cohen Klein, were sentenced to 43 and 32 years respectively for the murder of David Occhialoni. I'm sorry if I massacred that name as well. I don't mean to, I just couldn't find the pronunciation for it. They had taken David down to Belangolo State Forest on his 17th birthday and killed him with an axe. Cohen recorded the whole thing on his mobile phone whilst Matthew bludgeoned David with an axe to death. Matthew was heard to have said on the recording, "That's what the Milats do." This was a thrill kill, and they both had no remorse for what they did. They were sentenced in 2012 with a non-parole period of 22 years for both of them. So that's just terrifying to me, knowing that he looked up to his great uncle and what he did and just copied him, but he with an axe, like, that's just, it's not even a quick death, like, depending on where he hacked him, but anyway. So whilst in prison, Milat had been implicated in a lot more and suspected to have been involved in a spat of killings of people that were backpackers. In 2001, Milat was ordered to give evidence at an inquest into the disappearance of 3 other female backpackers, but no case has been brought against him due to the lack of evidence. Similar inquiries were launched in 2003 in relation to the disappearance of 2 nurses, and again in 2005 relating to the disappearance of hitchhiker Annette Briffa, but no charges have resulted. On the 8th of November 2004, Milat gave a televised interview on Australian Story, in which he denied that any of his family had been implicated in the 7 murders. So this was flipping on what his defence team were actually trying to do in the original trial for the 7 murders and the attack on Onions. I don't know if this is a truthful admission, or just something to take the light off his family, because in the following year a lawyer that had previously acted for Milat was sacked, John Marsden, had made a deathbed statement in which he claimed that Milat had been assisted by his sister Shirley Soiree in the killings of the 2 British backpackers. So there's just a lot of flipping of stories and people chiming in about this killing, but I believe Milat had gave that interview just to take the light off his family, because I know that they were in the media a lot. A lot of people were harassing them about information and things like that, so I believe he was just trying to get the light off his family. So in May 2015, Milat's brother Boris told Dr. Stephen Apperin, a former homicide detective who serves as a consultant with the LAPD and FBI, among others, that Milat was responsible for another shooting, that of taxi cab driver Neville Knight in 1962, after Milat admitted to the crime. After conducting polygraph tests with Boris Milat and Alan Dillon, the man convicted of Knight's shooting, Apperin is convinced that both men are telling the truth and that Ivan Milat did in fact shoot Knight. So I don't know if he did get in trouble for this one, but yeah, that was an interesting fact that he actually was killing people in 1962. There's also been some controversy this year in regards to Milat, so 2018, and the testing that was done on hairs that Joanne Walters was found to be clutching in her hand at the time of her death. At the time the crime occurred, testing was completed on the hairs, and it was found that they were not the hairs of either Joanne or Milat, fueling rumours that Milat did not act alone. With the different ways of killing, etc., like explained before, in July of this year, retesting was allegedly done on the hairs that were found in Joanne's hand, and it was determined that the hairs are in fact Joanne's. I believe that this is utter lies and an attempt to sweep it under the carpet, that there could potentially be another killer out there that assisted Milat that never was caught being one of his family members or someone else. He had an accomplice. So the true crime expert Amanda Howard, yes, I reference her a lot, especially in this case as she corresponds with Milat, supports this theory. And this is where I got it from, and from the minuscule research I have done for this episode. I believe that there were other people involved, but I would love to hear everyone's theories in regards to this. But yeah, definitely believe that he wasn't alone. I just feel like the ways in which the killings were done, it just feels like he couldn't have done it alone. Maybe he could have, but I don't know. Well, that brings us to the end of episode 5 of the True Crime Melting Pot. I really enjoyed this podcast today, and also doing the research for this one. I apologize again for missing last week's episode. A few things were missed, and I could not get the podcast up in quality, and I always wanted to make sure it's quality. Don't want to make sure it's like crappy or anything like that. But I was able to upload this week. So head over to our Facebook page and get involved in the giveaway. The post should be up after I've uploaded this. Head over to our Instagram and give it a like. Also, don't forget to check out our sponsor Killer Trace and get involved for their launch on the 31st of October. I've had the opportunity to see the system as part of the beta, and it's so well run and set up like you are an actual detective. So sign up today at www.killertrace.com or head over to their Instagram and give them a like at killertrace. Thank you guys for listening, and I will see you all next week with a brand new crime to speak about. So, yeah, thank you very much.